Hello, and welcome to my tutorial series on how to make a 3D game in Unity. In this video, we will be adding rotational movements to our camera so that it follows our player. Let's begin. So the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to go into our camera controller script, and we're going to create another public variable. This is going to be a float also. And we're going to call this rotate speed. So there's going to be a speed by which our character is going to turn. Down here in the update, we're going to create another float. We're going to call it horizontal, and it's going to equal input dot get axis parentheses rotation marks mouse X, and make sure you put a space in between mouse and X, and we'll learn why we're doing that in a second, times our variable rotate speed. So coming back to this mouse X here, if we go back into our Unity editor and we go to Edit, Project Settings, and Input Manager, and here we have all our axes here, and here's all the variable inputs we can put in. If we go down here to mouse X, this is the input for moving the mouse in the X direction, and we have to spell it in the script exactly how it is spelled here. So it's mouse space X, otherwise it won't work. So we're going to go back to our script, and then we're going to put target dot rotate, and we're going to put 0, horizontal, 0. Alright, and then we're going to hit save. And now we're going to explain this for just a second, because here's our target, here's our camera, and we want it to rotate, and in this we have the X, Y, and Z axis. And even though we're talking about the movement of the mouse X direction, when it comes to the rotation of our target, we don't want it to move in the X and Z directions, only in the Y directions, and I'll show you that why that is right now. We got to get it. Let it save a second. We're going to X this out. So if we look over here to our player, we have our transform, and in it we have position and rotation. So as you can see, and if you didn't know this, if you put your mouse here next to your X, you'll see those two little arrows, and if you click on it, that will allow you to slide back and forth to move in that direction. Now as you can see, when the X direction inside the editor here is going in this back and forth motion, and that's not what we want to do with our camera. Same thing with the Z direction here, it sort of tilts back and forth from side to side, and that's not what we want to do. We want to have our camera rotate around our character in the Y direction. If we look here, this is the movement we want from it. So going back to our script, that is why we put no movement in the X direction, no movement in the Z direction, and our movement in the Y direction is going to be based off of the value of our horizontal float we created here, which is inputted from the mouse X direction, and it's multiplied by this rotate speed float we created. Now that we're done that, we're going to go back into our editor. We're going to go up to our main camera. Right here in our camera controller script, we're going to change that to 5. This is the public variable we created. We're going to hit play. And now we can move our character. We can rotate him along the Y-axis. However, we turn him and he always goes in the same direction. So we don't want that. We want him to turn with the camera. So let's get started on that. Let's go back into our script. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to move these guys, because we don't want our look at before this. It'll create problems when it's animated or when it renders. So I'm going to type out what we're doing here, and then I'm going to explain it. So we're going to have a float called desired angle, and then it's going to be equal to target dot Euler angles dot y, and then below that we're going to have quaternion, and our quaternion is going to be called rotation. And that's going to equal quaternion dot Euler, and then 0, comma, desired angle, comma, 0. And that'll be the end of that line. And then down here for our target position, we're going to change this up a little bit. It's now going to be target dot position minus rotation times camera offset, and close the parentheses like so. Everything looks good. We'll hit save. So what happened here is that we created a float, we called it desired angle, and then we have now this new word right here called Euler angles. And in a nutshell, the Euler angles are basically the regular X, Y, and Z rotation angles. Normally this is called pitch, this is called yaw, and this is called roll. So what ends up happening sometimes, if you move around on these rotational axes, what you'll end up with, for example, you have this red one right here, which is the X, and this blue one right here, which is the Z axis, and sometimes if you move it around enough, what ends up happening is that the X axis and the Z axis will end up in the same plane. And this is called gimbal lock, and it confuses the computer because it doesn't understand why you have two rotations in the same plane. Well, quaternions are a mathematical method to solving this problem. It was a mathematical formula that someone came up with. I forget that person's name, probably like 100 years ago. And it's very important in 3D modeling or 3D animation to solve the problem of gimbal lock. So we created our float. We made it into this Euler angle, or our Y rotation. And then we created our quaternion, and we said our quaternion is going to be 0 on the x-axis, 0 on the z-axis, and the input is going to be our desired angle that we created here. Then we changed our position of our camera, where we had it, the position of the camera minus the offset. But now we want the offset multiplied by our quaternion rotation. So we'll hit save. And I'll include a video in the description of this video to better describe in detail what quaternions are. It's a very complex subject, and it would eat up probably more time than I wanted this video to be to explain all of it. Hopefully you understood what was going on here. So we're going to hit play. And now I can move my character with the camera. But I still have the problem of he just moves in the same direction regardless of where the camera is. So we'll get to fixing that. But first we're going to give our target some movements along the x-axis. So we're basically going to copy everything, and we're going to change everything that was y-axis to x-axis. So just copy and paste this right here, and instead of horizontal, we're going to put vertical. Instead of mouse X, we're going to put mouse Y. Down here, we're going to copy and paste this, but we're going to make our y-axis 0, and we're going to make this guy vertical. And we'll put a little space so we don't get confused. And then for our float here, oops, we're going to copy and paste him also, but instead of desired angle dot Euler dot x, we'll just call that x. Actually, we'll probably have to call this desired angle x and desired angle y, and put this as y, and in this place we're going to put desired angle x. So now we're going to be able to rotate our character in both the x and y directions with our mouse. Now we're going to hit play. Now I'm going to be able to look this way, and I'm going to be able to look this way. But now we have a flipping problem. Okay, to solve this problem, we're going to go up here to the main camera. We're going to right click, and we're going to create an empty game object. And we're going to call this guy pivot for now. And then up here, we're going to create a public transform, and we're going to name it pivot. And down here in the start menu, we're going to say pivot dot transform dot position is going to equal to target dot transform dot position, and underneath that we're going to have pivot dot transform dot parent is going to equal to target dot transform, and that should be good right there. I'm going to hit save, and now what this is going to do is that when we hit play at the start of the game, is that it's going to create a pivot game object in the player object. So we're first going to go to the main camera. Here's our public transform. We don't have anything there, so we're going to go ahead and put our pivot in, and then we're going to hit play. And if we go over here, we can now see we got our pivot has become a parent of our player. Now we're going to go back into our script, and over here where we have our vertical, we're going to change this to pivot, and also we're going to change this other target to pivot. So now the float is going to equal to where the pivot is, not to where the target is. And hit save. We're going to let it compile. We're going to hit play. And now when we move our mouse, our player doesn't rotate around off the ground and such anymore. So we're going to end this portion right here. In the next video, we're going to fix our character movements to the mouse movements and clean up our camera work. As always, thank you for watching. Like my video, subscribe to my channel, follow me on Facebook and Twitter, and support me on Patreon. All links in the description below. See you next time.